So, part 2. I decided to set the motor in, and some good and some bad. It does fit, and I was worried that the AC wouldn't fit past the booster, but as you can see it does. The problem here is that alternator sits about an inch too tall for the bonnet to close. But I have picked up a different one of these off of a different Range Rover, so that's what I'm going to try today to see if that will lower it down. It'll lower it down, whether it lowers it down enough, and then if I can, it's made for a completely different alternator, whether I'll be able to make something work. So that'll be today's little project. The other thing, which I didn't realize, because I had fitted the transmission by itself up in here by itself. I don't think you can really see very well here, but the transmission, the bulge where the for the starter, sitting on the edge of the tunnel. So I'm going to have to modify that with a hammer, which means I'll probably lift the motor out again. So here's the view from underneath, and it shows a little better. You can just see right in here the interference with just the fin above the chalk marked one. And here's the back of the transmission. You see, this is the mount that I made up. This is just temporary, just to hold it up. But there's another one there. These are the original transmission mounts. I should be able to use a bolt. These bushings, one bushing above, one bushing below, and that should be the transmission mount. It'll have to go up about another ½ an inch, and then that'll give it some clearance left to right. I think that'll be fine. You can also see the 10-degree twist in the transmission, and that's because apparently in Land Rovers they have the engine setting at 10 degrees to the left to make them fit. I'm not quite sure what difference that makes, but nonetheless. So this, I'm not really happy about this, but several people have done it, particularly on P5s. Seems to work. If not, I do have the Land Rover transmission, which which is much deeper this way with a different set of screens, deeper that way. So if I need to, I can use that. Most guys take those because they're about this deep, which is kind of big. But they slice them and make them shallower, but they wind up with a flat bottom. So we'll see. Time will tell. This is the other problem here, is that this transmission does not have a speedometer drive. So I picked up a magnetic sensor, which is typically for cruise controls, and a drive unit to drive the speedometer, and hopefully that'll work. This is the Jaguar tail shaft, and this used to have a big chunk on the end here. So you see I've sliced all that off with a hacksaw just to get it out of the way. I have that piece laying around. I can show you that after. Now, this is the piece that I cut off the transmission, or at least the biggest chunk of it. Used to be on the back of the transmission in that orientation. So this must be what the mount was, but it was all excess to my requirements. So it's gone. This is also, I just bought this. This is from Harbor Freight. This is, I'm not sure what they call it. It's basically a lower toolbox, but it's got this wooden top, so it can be a workbench. And I bought this. This is a Wilton vise, which I'm very happy with. Get this from Amazon. It was I think about $100. It's a lot nicer than the vices at Harbor Freight. About the same price. I have another Wilton vise in the main garage. It's a bit bigger than this. I've had it for probably 20 years now. I'm very, very happy with it. And then these are magnetic. They're from Harbor Freight. Put them on. Bought this one for here. We've got a couple. This is a Harbor Freight toolbox roll around as well. I've had that about, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. Very happy with that. These ones, there's no way the magnets will live to this, so These are bolted in. Have the this is kind of handy for the gloves, paper towel holder, and the racks for the spray cans. All pretty nice. But the only thing is this is worn out now because I've got too much weight on it anyhow. So I just put a hose clamp around it, locked it up. I never closed it anyway. And this is the other thing I just bought. This is from Harbor Freight also. This is the electric battery powered socket wrench. Actually works pretty well. It's not super strong. It's not as strong. I have an air powered one I've had for ever. It's not as strong as that, but this works pretty good. You don't break anything with it, which is kind of nice, and it ratchets. So a lot of times if you get it to a bigger bolt, you got to sort of break it loose with the ratchet, and then you hit it with the power, and away it comes. So that's been actually pretty nice. I was surprised the batteries last a really long time. I bought a spare battery so I could charge one while I was using one. I probably didn't need to do that because I'm just charging the battery about once a week. So it'd be pretty easy just to throw it in the charger when you're done at the end of the day. Because I usually only work 2 or 3 hours at a time. So, you know, it might be different if you were working in a repair garage. I suppose if you threw it in at lunchtime at the end of the day, that'd be good. Well, here's the new shorter bracket, and it did lower the alternator, and I got the bonnet on and latched. But when it did, the top of the alternator here was still pressed up into the insulation on the bottom of the bonnet, so it's still too close. So that's not going to work. That's part number ERR 6892, which I think is off a 95 Range Rover. I've also had to trim that water pipe, but that's not a big deal. The end of that pipe is all rusty anyway. If I was going to use this, it also would have been shimmed out this way, I don't know, a 1/4 inch or so, which would have given me some clearance around the heater temperature sensor, and it would have, because this does not have a bracket for the air conditioning. So I put a plate back here. I could have fabricated a bracket for that. So, but unfortunately, that's not going to work because it's still just a bit too tall. Short of putting the old dead motor mounts in, which had sagged down probably 1.5 inches. We'll have to figure out something else. So here's the other bracket, and then the old bracket. You can see how much smaller the replacement was. The old bracket is ERR 4514, which came on that motor. So you can see that they have very different type mounts. This has got pads that go between the fins of the alternator, and this is really designed for an alternator with solid bosses, but it could have made it work. With the back of it here, the front there, shimmed it out about a 1/4 inch or so, would have lined all the pulleys up. Also would have had to build this out so you can see how much lower down that is. So I probably would have turned up something to do all that. And I still might. I've found a smaller alternator, but I'm not sure I'll be able to mount it. So I'll have to take a look at that. And I'm starting to really think that I'm going to have to get out the old welder and make my own bracket at this point. But we'll see.